Okay, so now we wait.
Well, you're probably in a better internet situation than I am. I'm on the side of a mountain in France, so.
Oh, I would still rather.
Oh, life sounds rough, huh? Oh God.
No, I can't complain, but internet speed is up and down, shall we say.
Yeah, I believe it. Oh, that's so awesome.
I'd
How
still
long are you out there for?
hang out in the mountains.
8 weeks so far. I'm probably, who knows? Now
Yeah.
we have no idea.
Who knows is the right answer.
That sounds
I'd
amazing.
probably like,
Sounds
Yeah.
amazing. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Colleen Vincent, and I am the Vice President of Community for the James Beard Foundation. And welcome to our webinar, You Can Adapt Tools and Creative Solutions. Before we begin and before I introduce our panelists, I just want to explain how the webinar works. This is being recorded, and by next week, the recording will be available with the past webinars and events page on openforgood.com. We'll save the questions for the end as time allows, but please feel free to write your questions at any time using the webinar toolbar. I can see them. And if you're having technical difficulties, please also use the webinar toolbar and we'll do what we can to troubleshoot. And so today's industry support webinar, You Can Adapt. In this year of uncertainty and financial loss, there has never been a better time to broaden your network, think creatively, and use every single item in the toolbox. And so I have two experts here that I'm really, really pleased to introduce. First, we have Vaughn Tan, Assistant Professor of Strategy at the University College London School of Management and author of The Uncertainty Mindset, Innovation Insights from the Frontiers of Food. And he is also an executive board member of ReThink Food. Our next guest is Chef Behzad Jamshidi, a culinary and cultural voice throughout the United States, with his background being densely centered around his mentorship for Michelin-starred and world-renowned chefs. He has been endorsed by some of the best chefs in America for his work in sharing his Iranian narrative through food, which had him featured actually at the coveted Beard House in 2019. His work is producing story-driven experiences and promoting socially conscious businesses, and it has grown to consult and advise some of the world's largest brands and organizations such as Virgin, MasterCard, Amazon, and various programs throughout the United Nations. His hospitality work is grounded in platforms, projects, and businesses that are community-focused and help drive narratives to work to better connect people through camaraderie and collaboration. And through Moosh, which he will talk more about, he hopes to work with and unify voices that will drive inclusivity and our American culture forward. So first, I want to welcome you both to our webinar on creative solutions. And if there's anything that you would like to round out in these bios, I'd like to turn the microphone over to each of you first before I go into our questions. So Vaughn, you first.
well, I think the only other thing that I want to say is I've built a free tool. It's called the Pandemic Pivot, which I think is going to be shared in the chat. And it's really, it's a very, very easy, very quick way to, again, very quickly and in a very broad strokes way, think through what you might change your business into so that you can make a more adaptable business, right? As uncertainty from the pandemic continues to like wash over us. Free tools like that might be useful.
Thank you, Vaughn. Behzad?
And on our part, we've put together a toolkit called Industry One, which, like Vaughn has mentioned, it's our way of consolidating all the different resources and tools that might exist within our greater network and our community and consolidating them together. So when we have the first conversations or interactions with a restaurateur or a small business, we're able to hear out their full story, get an idea of some of the challenges that they might be navigating, and then connect them to people, tools, resources, financial tools that can help them better assess the way that they want to take their businesses forward.
Thank you, Behzad. So the $100,000 question is always, how did you come to food as a focus? So, Behzad, we know that you're a chef, but, there's always a story behind that. And Vaughn, while you are a strategy expert and professional, you specialize in food. So there's always like a beautiful story behind any of that. So Behzad, we'll start with you and then Vaughn will go to you.
I grew up in a family restaurant. I think ever since the time I was 10. I've been putting away hours in and out of school just cooking with my mom and my aunt. And I think Iranian food and Iranian culture, very much like many cultures in the world, you can't really get to the center of the people without starting to talk about the food. And so I think a lot of cuisine, the identity around food has been a part of my nurture as I was growing up. And there are things that we can be good at. There are applied tools of education and things that we could have explored. I don't think I'd be able to kind of help people come together and share perspectives and enlighten one another if I didn't use food. I think it's one of the most disarming ways to get people to have a conversation with one another. It's very easy to put something communal in front of a person's face and get them to put religion and politics and everything else aside for a second. And so food's that tool that I've kind of adapted and used so far to drive the conversations that I think bring people closer together.
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, in analogous but not completely similar ways. So I'm Singaporean by birth. I grew up there for the first 21 years of my life. And if you know any Singaporeans, you know that we think about food all the time in a very different way, I think, from other countries that think about food all the time. It's like a culture where eating and finding the most interesting place, and not necessarily the fanciest place, just the most interesting place to go eat something, is part of everyday life. So I was always very interested in it. And I think my interest in food and my interest in strategy and thinking about how to organize businesses, they kind of came together almost by accident. Jose Andres, who I'm sure everybody knows, went to give a talk at Harvard when I was in doctoral school. And I was looking around for a project to work on at the time. And so I just went to see him and I asked him, can I go check out what your innovation team looks like? And I was expecting him to say no, but he said yes. And so I went there. I hung out with them for a few weeks. That turned into a few more sessions where I would go down and spend more time with them. I followed them around when they were opening up a restaurant. And that led me to go to a bunch of other R&D kitchens. And it turned into the focus of my research, right? So that's how I became accidentally interested in understanding how innovation gets organized by way of looking at innovation teams in the restaurant industry, which also help us understand how restaurants and other businesses can be more adaptable and pivot, not just because they have to, but because they want to and because it's good for them.
Wow. So, we were talking beforehand, and it was actually a really great and very interesting conversation about how, the pandemic has forced chefs to kind of reconsider their art and passion direction into more of a, government interaction, business, capital management orientation. What I would like to know from your perspectives, what haven't they been able to do before the pandemic that they should be doing right now?
I mean, I can start to speak to it where, we've had to do this a lot in our own business as well, but everyone has a product. It's more or less usually driven by something personal to them or a story. At least it's the case in many small businesses that we're seeing that are affected by the pandemic, whether they're first or second generation places that are there throughout America. And it's about taking a step back, looking at your business and figuring out, what is the relation towards food as a culture? And what are the products that address that? Like, are you able to give people the family of four experience at their dinner table in the middle of a pandemic? Are you able to create that one-off product that everyone wants to have inside of their fridge? There are many, many opportunities just in cuisine itself by being able to identify as a Thai restaurant or a Korean restaurant or a Persian restaurant, and knowing that there are certain products that you can diversify that can, not only exist in your restaurant as something that you can enjoy in a sit-down meal or in a takeaway, but what's something that you can market and put towards the shelves? What's something holistic that you can introduce into people's routines? What are different ways of thinking about your business where you can not just diversify your product offerings, but maximize on the way that people interact with your brand and interact with your products? I have a loyalty towards the brands and the restaurants and people because of who they are. Their products and things are second thought. And if I could be exposed to certain certain offerings and certain things that are coming out of a brand, I'd want to figure out how I can, envelop that Korean restaurant that's now selling condiments into my lifestyle. Now I can take a piece of their business away and put it into my home. So I think it's really about thinking about where, the potential avenues are to monetize your business further, but in a way that feels complete, organic, and natural to what your brand is and what it's trying to do.
Thank you, Behzad. Vaughn?
Yeah, I think actually it doesn't sound like it's in line with what Behzad is saying, but I think also another thing which is possible now, and in fact is necessary now, is really focusing not on trying to be a restaurant that is Insta famous or PR famous with people who are flying in from somewhere far, far away. Now, more than ever before, it's really clear that the right way to run a restaurant that is long-term sustainable is to really focus on who your customers are that are able to get to you, right? So I think it used to be very hard to be ambitious and want to run, for instance, a neighborhood restaurant that people in the neighborhood would want to come back to again and again because it didn't seem ambitious enough. If you didn't get the Michelin stars, if you weren't like on the 50 best, if you weren't like tweeted or Instagrammed all the time or periscoped or whatever it is, you weren't successful. But now we've kind of seen that being Insta famous or being PR famous is kind of a hollow victory, right? The moment travel stops or the moment there's a pandemic, it's like what's really important is having a very close connection to the people who are actually going to be always possibly your customers. And I think if I think about the restaurateurs I know who have in the past committed to being this kind of restaurant, they may not become Insta famous, but they have a really satisfying and very sustainable business, right? It's sustainable in the sense that they've got really loyal customers that will cut them a break when it's a busy night in the kitchen. But at the same time, there's a really strong tie. And this is something I think Behzad, you were talking about. There's a really strong tie between a customer and a restaurant if the restaurant is there for the customer. And that is one of the ultimate resources in tough times, right? If customers really want to support you as the restaurant, in a sense, it doesn't matter what it is that you're producing. Obviously, you will produce things that are consistent with who you are as a restaurant. They will want to buy that thing anyway. And so it's economically sustainable. But I think it also is, it's just nice. I used to work in a restaurant. It's just nice to work in a restaurant where you are not seeing different faces every day, people who are coming to you because they saw a review or something. It's nice to see people who come back every week, every other week, where they know you and you know them. It's a more human way of running a business anyway. So I think this is a real, it's a secret, hidden, horrible, but amazing opportunity to do something which I think people have always wanted to do, but never thought that they could.
Yeah.
So I have a question, and this speaks very directly to your book, Vaughn, and then your perspective as a chef, Behzad, is that right now, that step back that's required is really challenging because people are, in a panicked and anxious state. And, and there's a scarcity that people feel. Doesn't necessarily mean it's completely accurate or inaccurate, but what are some tools that people can use to kind of step back, to be able to make those kind of flexible and creative decisions to move forward and evolve?
Behzad?
I would say the first thing is looking around into your community base, looking at other restaurants, hospitality brands, small businesses, and even more important, businesses that are not related to hospitality and are not related to food, and figuring out how they deploy products, how they develop their brands, how they outreach to their communities and engage their user bases. I saw a collaboration recently with Jono Pandolfi and Parachute being mainly for bedding and bathroom wear and things like that, and them trying to develop and diversify more into like a wholesome home goods brand. They featured specialty plates that Jono Pandolfi specifically made for them. So now these two communities are learning to intersect with one another, and their audience in Jono Pandolfi is being exposed to Parachute and their lifestyle, and Parachute is being now exposed to Jono Pandolfi. Like the power of loyalty is something that I think every good hospitality brand has anywhere. You feed anyone a good meal, they're a subscriber heart and soul to everything that it is that you're doing. And being able to find other businesses and other small businesses that have shared perspective, shared values, and shared philosophies, and collaborating with them, or at least looking at the interchange that they're having with other businesses around them, leading from those examples. Because if you may not have the idea, these are all techniques that can be applied to another, there are techniques that you learn in the kitchen that can be applied to your own food. These are not techniques and resources in business that can be applied to your own model and your own products.
Yeah. I totally agree, by the way, with what Behzad is saying about finding ways to identify other businesses that may not even be in your same industry, but share your same values, right? So this means, I think, in many cases, being able to articulate what those values are in the first place. You always know them, but you may not be able to say what they are. I think this is a very good opportunity. It's not just an opportunity, it's a requirement now to know what you really stand for, because those are the things that you try and preserve, and everything else you can drop, right? So you, in a time that's really lean, like right now, you can't simply expect to keep every single thing that you had before the pandemic. You have to like know what to cut, and the things that you should not cut are the things that you really value. Those are your values, literally. I think another thing that is a strategy, I guess, is there is this idea, which I think is a false idea, that when a business pivots, every single thing the business does changes. And what this means is it makes pivoting sound really daunting. It makes it sound very expensive. It also makes it sound very risky, because you're putting all your eggs in not the same basket, but a new basket. I think this is completely false, and it's very counterproductive. The better way to think about pivoting is think about what it means to experiment, right? And prototyping. Like chefs actually do this all the time. Like you aren't going to put out a whole new menu tomorrow. You're going to try maybe a new dish. You might tweak a part of a dish. And the whole idea is to try something really small where you can do something that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money, but teaches you something no matter whether or not it succeeds. And if it succeeds, you can go bigger. Like if you're trying to make a new product, you don't have to have the packaging, the social media campaign, you don't have to have everything ready all at the beginning. You can try a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And by doing things one small step at a time, you're limiting your exposure to risk. And it's also making it just psychologically easier to try things out, because you're not necessarily saying my whole new business is going to be this. And if it fails, there's also like the emotional scarring that results. But if you say, here is my business, and I'm going to try this small little thing. If you all like it, I'm going to do more of it. If you don't like it, I'm just going to stop doing it. It's not so hard, right? So it also makes it just less daunting to think about what pivoting looks like. If you think of pivoting as lots and lots of small experiments that may not be expensive, but are all designed to teach you something, whether or not they're successful.
So, let's talk a little bit more, and I have one specific to you, Behzad, but Vaughn, let's talk a little bit more about the uncertainty mindset, which started as a paper and now is published as a book and is available on all major bookseller platforms. Let's talk a little bit about the research that went into that, and your findings.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to talk at length. You may have to stop me from talking about the book. But I think the research was, I had tons and tons of fun doing it. I was standing around in kitchens for weeks or months at a time, like washing dishes when they would let me do that, and just kind of like looking to see what was going on. And in many cases, because I was coming in from outside, I'm not a chef by training. I love to cook, but I'm not a chef. So I was coming in from outside and I didn't know what they were doing. And so I was asking all sorts of really stupid questions. And I think if you are willing, and if you're in a position where you have no choice but to ask stupid questions, you often learn things which the people who know all the answers don't yet know. So the book is all of those answers. So I would say that the main takeaway from the uncertainty mindset is that if you expect the future to be something that you can know that is predictable, you will always be really stressed out, you'll be really distressed, and you'll be very unhappy when the future turns out to be something that you couldn't predict, right? So the biggest difference between all the successful teams that I've looked at, both in food and outside of it, because I work with tech companies and startups as well, the most important thing, the biggest difference, is that the successful ones who are able to keep adapting and innovating simply don't expect to know what the future will look like. They're always ready to be like completely surprised. They know that it will often be a little bit uncomfortable to be doing something when you don't know what you're doing. Like that phase when you're just learning how to do something You're like, oh, am I doing this right? I don't know. Is this going to work out okay? I don't know. That's uncomfortable. But the moment you say, yeah, I know this is going to happen, you're ready for it. It's like you're learning stuff, you're doing different things because you're not expecting things to be a particular way. And I think that's the biggest difference. That changes almost everything about how these very successful teams and companies work. Like, because they're not expecting to know what the future will be, they don't have any expectations about how to be in that future, and they can just do whatever needs to be done. And I think there is a lesson to be drawn from that for right now, right? Like, we can't even expect to know what, like, frankly, what's going to happen in the next 73 or 72 days. We don't know. Right. So why pretend that the future is knowable? Why not just say, okay, I don't know, things are probably going to be a little bit like this, but let's be ready for things to be totally different so that we can take advantage of it, right? And I think that unlocks a lot of stuff.
Wow. And I do have a question about like scenario planning with that, but first, Behzad, I wanted to talk more about the how Moosh came to be, and then Industry One, and how chefs can take advantage of both of these. So if you wouldn't mind filling us in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I can give the short spark notes, Moosh was an absolute accident. I took a sabbatical from Gabriel Corther. I'm from Canada. Regardless of what kind of foreign national you were for the last 4 years, it was impossible to find, all the going through all the legal channels to being able to live and work in the United States. Food doesn't pay you enough money to be able to go through all of the legal preparations. It was insane. And I wanted to petition for my own green card. I needed to get proof under my belt that I was doing something outstanding. Obviously, being at the James Beard House, it completely changed my case and secured me here in the States and everything else. But it's this pay for play where Washington Post article came out recently, actually, with me and Dominic Curran and a few other chefs, where we put ourselves at the mercy of this publicity and working with gatekeepers and being connected to tools and resources to advance our careers. And so I started doing little events on the one day a week that I had off, and I felt kind of I was upset at the way that representation worked inside our cities and for food media, and how there's 100 people behind me, from butchers to spice vendors and everyone else, that are kind of missing on the recognition of what their collaborative efforts created. And also, how do we kind of create a community as a union to be able to collaborate with one another and with people that we have, great advocacy with, we know their ethics, we know their integrity. And so we put together Moosh as a way to represent the community that we were using to power certain projects and events. It grew into, those projects being at the scale of Virgin and programs for MasterCard and whatever else it was. And now we started to feel a real responsibility to our community. How do we now use our numbers to consolidate resources and tools so that we can all work better together? If there are better restaurants lining Sullivan Street in New York City, as a business person, that enriches the environment which I get to interact with. And from an industry standpoint, we all get to win, because these are all examples and ideas and achievements that we get to exchange with one another. I feel like we talk about the competition being so steep, but the competition between attracting consumers, there isn't competition interchangeably within our industry. All the best restaurants in New York City, from Michelin and elsewhere, are all friends with one another. There's competitiveness to a degree, because that's like, we're used to being a little bit hot-headed in the kitchen, but you do want to see the restaurant down the street survive and thrive as well as you do. And so, I'll say this, I think we have to kind of take the COVID out of COVID and think about how we just adapt our models, period. What are the best practices for business going forward, regardless of there being a pandemic and regardless of, federal aid and whatever else, that these tangibles that we're talking about? Put all the uncertainty aside. What can you do today to make your business better, period? How does that then survive a pandemic? How does that then survive federal aid? How does that better tell your story and help you better relate with the community that's around you? And so I'm incredibly privileged to be in this place where every new individual that we add into our community base is an entire lesson and an entire background, an entire story that I get to infer to help make sure that our programs and our work are it's a little bit more enriched than it was before.
Thank you, Behzad. And so, both of you certainly talked about scenario planning that allows you to be as flexible as possible. So planning to not necessarily plan, planning to adapt. And so, I wanted to know in your minds, and, it'd be great if there are examples that you can point to, what does a successful pivot or transformation look like to you at this point? So Vaughn, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think this actually goes a little bit to scenario planning. I've been saying this for many months now, and I still believe it's true, even though supposedly an effective vaccine has just been announced. I think that when you're doing scenario planning, it doesn't make any sense to plan for every single possible scenario, right? Like that's just an infinity of possible things that could happen. It's not useful. I think it's more useful to think from the perspective of what are some scenarios that are plausible that will affect how you do business. And from a restaurant's perspective, I think the clearest scenario that you need to plan for is a scenario where you're not allowed to have dine-in custom, right? So if you're a restaurant, you're either going to be able to seat people inside your restaurant, they sit down, they get served by people, or you can't. And if you're not planning for both of those scenarios, then you're not doing the right kind of scenario planning. Now, this goes to which restaurants I think have been very successful in pivoting in a way that is robust. Because I think, by the way, I completely agree also with what Behzad said. You shouldn't be planning to redesign your business for COVID. You should be planning to redesign your business to be better in a way that if COVID hits, it's like, okay, fine, it'll survive anyway, and it might even be better, right? So the one example that I'm thinking about is a restaurant in London that immediately when lockdowns happened, they said, okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, at first, just start selling the food that we currently sell, takeaway. But in the time when we're doing that for the first week, we're going to rethink what it means for food to be like the kind of food that we would produce, right? Like what is our style in the form of a takeaway menu? And they gradually evolved that menu over the course of like 4 or 5 weeks to the point where they could execute that menu well with a reduced team at a GP that was consistent with what they were trying to make before, and in a way that was also consistent with what style they had before they had to shut down indoor dining, right? And once they did that, they anchored their business model around takeaway of this kind of food with the ability, because of the way they designed that menu, to immediately turn on dine-in the moment dine-in becomes available. So what I'm trying to say is the thinking that I thought was very good was don't just sell the food that you normally sell takeaway if it doesn't work as takeaway, because you have to design stuff to be in a box, you have to design stuff so that the price point is different, but the GP is the same, that kind of thing. But more importantly than that, the really interesting thing that they did, which I wish everybody else would do, was to anchor the business model on a way of selling food that doesn't matter whether or not you're allowed to seat people in for dine-in. Like it's robust no matter whether or not there are lockdowns or no lockdowns, right? They're not going to prevent you from selling food takeaway. They will stop you from seating people in your restaurant. So now that their business model is anchored around this kind of takeaway that's optimized for who they are and what they want to sell, if there's a lockdown, things are not great, but they will survive, right? And then the moment lockdowns are released, they can turn on indoor dining within 2 or 3 days. It's great. That's what I'm saying by planning for plausible scenarios and adjusting your business model so that it makes sense in the worst case realistic scenario.
Right. And before I get to you, Behzad, I mean, I appreciate, being like truthful and clear about that because, while COVID is the thing that we are dealing with right now, obviously the World Health Organization says that this is the first of multiple pandemics that will happen in our lifetime, and many of them will involve a respiratory access point because that makes the most sense, right, for a virus. So thank you. I mean, I appreciate that kind of walking through of that restaurant. And if you wanna just tell Debbie in the chat what it is so people can go,
Sure.
go and look. So Behzad, to you, what does a successful pivot or transformation look like? And are there examples that you would like to or can share?
Yeah, I'd love to share a few examples from our community, and I think that in and of itself and these changes kind of speaks volumes. First one, I mentioned Jono Pandolfi a little bit earlier. I remember being a stage at Hawksworth in Vancouver using their plateware and it like blowing my mind. And they basically make these SKUs of these products that are direct to wholesale for restaurants and restaurateurs. And they've made this pivot on being able to fulfill retail orders. I actually got an order of plates that's sitting across my table today, like within like a week and a half. And being able to extend something that people have only traditionally interacted with in a restaurant setting, but now is a product that people can have inside their homes. And also to be able to kind of promote that, collaborating with people like Brad Leon from Bon Appetit, creating like a fermentation crock pot, and creating products that have a story and a personality that again connects you to an entire usership and following of people that may not have otherwise interacted with your community base or been a consumer base in the beginning. Another example, say for a very small business, Saeed Porke of Taste La Persia is a really close friend of mine. His brick and mortar is not running, but he's doing fulfillment for catering 2-3 days a week. So he'll kind of launch the menu for the week on a Monday, Tuesday. Everyone will write in, DM him on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, Venmo him whatever the money is for those orders. And like him and his brother on the weekends after, you have like a $50 price point entry, you get a bunch of soups, some things that you can throw in the freezer, Persian soul food for your month that you're at home. And he'll come and drop off those orders. So there's no third-party delivery. He's paying for the price of gas and he's making the most of his product, knowing exactly how much of it that he needs to make each week. And that's one example of, a small business that would be like scraping to put away $800 or $1,000 just trying to run even an outdoor dining program. It's not worth it. But they found an efficacy in this model that's even better than if they were to run in a non-pandemic environment. La Nuraquina, another example. They traditionally did frozen items. They have a great SKU that they have retail items in other places. And then they thought, how do we maximize the location that we have on Sullivan Street? So now they're doing hot prepared foods, things that they can utilize third-party groups like Grubhub and Caviar and Uber Eats to be able to deploy another product offering that, it's inspired by their Mexican roots. It's not something traditionally that they did. It's a quote unquote pivot. They still offer what they did before. La Nuraquina's brand hasn't changed, but now here's another diversified revenue stream that they're adding into the pool. And another model, and I'm gonna take a second to just kind of like do a few pokes at ghost kitchens. There's this idea of like talking about running these virtual models, and like I've been in so many conversations with VCs over the last couple months about people trying to get involved inside this space. I don't think it's smart unless you're in the real estate space, because at the end of the day, when we're not in a pandemic, people want to interact with the kinship of another human being on the other side of their food. Like you're never gonna lose the humanity behind what it is to cook food, buy food, and interact with food. And I think in some density, whether there's a blow up for virtual kitchens or something, or virtual brands, I should say, for the next couple months, everyone wants to go back to the thing that makes them feel good. What is it when you take plywood or you take like a poster and you stick up like a chef in a hat? There's no personality behind it. It's just branding. So with that, there are other ways if you're in the place where you have more real estate that you're holding on to that you can't use. One of our partners, Melody, that's here in Silver Lake in Los Angeles, they run a central beverage program. They have a retail shop for really amazing natural wines that they sell, and they have residencies where other chefs come in, take on the cost of food costs, pay a portion of rent or some form of revenue share to be inside that kitchen, and they have these rotating food programs that can last a week, a month, so that they're just responsible for the margins and beverage and handle that program. and then the rest of their real estate, their kitchens being offset by this third-party collaborator that's coming in to do their food program. So I think when we start realizing two things, that we all need help, that we can all help each other, there doesn't need, not to say that federal tools and resources, super helpful. I can't wait until the SBA program starts rolling again and I can help a lot of the small businesses from that. But there are organic tools and resources that have gotten the industry this far. As broken as it is, the food industry is one that's the most resilient. And I think it takes that same idea of using community, camaraderie, and collaboration, taking us to other businesses and other food programs that are more resilient, that can take on the next 10 pandemics tenfold.
So let's just go. I mean, you've already started mentioning them. So let's just go in the deep dive. So federal stimulus, right? Now, we thought we'd have another one. We know there's not likely to be one until January at the earliest. Let's be frank in that regard. Vaughn is laughing at us because he lives in Europe. But so, here we are, we as an industry certainly need that kind of support, need more attention from the federal government. We won't necessarily get that right now. So what are, and you mentioned some already, Behzad, but what are the options and tools that the industry needs to access and leverage now to just survive while the scenario planning is going on? Yeah.
I mean, to tailwind a little bit off of what I said, I mean, it's this, I said it in regards to our community. Everyone has an expertise and everyone has something that they're very, very good at. I'm in a constant place where I'm learning how to like design website graphics and everything else just as an entrepreneur in my own business. And recognizing that the community around you is the most powerful tool you can possibly have. It's as easy as reaching out to a photographer on social media that you might follow and being able to get them to come into your business and help better brand and better tell your story, or interacting with certain brands in some unorthodox ways. I would even say like interacting with a plateware company and collaborating and borrowing their plates for a couple of weeks and promoting them through the food programs that you're having, so that you're using their consumer base to convene these two communities together. I think the issue was we got so much financial aid, we got no strategy. There weren't people there to truly teach us how to use the tools that were being put in front of us. Imagine, and like for me, it was almost primitive. It's like, here's certain businesses that have never utilized the loan or never, had $5,000 to put towards something that they needed. And where is the leadership in being able to give that person one point of contact or one point of reference to be like, you have this amount of money, we can grow it into this solution that takes you beyond the pandemic. It's outdoor dining with certain logistics that make sure that you could potentially have it year round or as close to it as possible. But everyone kind of got in this angst of being like, there's a problem, we need to react, and we're only going to think in the ways that are available to us and not utilizing the people that wanted to lend themselves and show them guidance. And so what we do with Industry One, outside of there being any financial tools, is literally just listening to you share however much or however little about your business and the hurdles that you're facing, so that if it's not me or someone from my team that can consult and advise or connect, there's someone within our network that has a solution to an issue that you're having. And all it is an exchange of conversation. One person pointing a problem, the other person bringing the idea to the table. That's it. It's super black and white. And the difference between electric heaters or propane heaters, that might be the one adjustment that changes the way that your outdoor dining or your business viability might work there. And say it's a policymaker. Maybe at first we didn't have the ability to have propane heaters outside. So then now we interact with people like James Beard or like Moosh and otherwise. And now we go towards policy. Now we start writing letters to the mail. Like the more that we surface what our communal issues and difficulties are, the more those individuals that are existing in the community space, that are advocates and are working to bring solutions to the table, can more directly address the issues that we're facing as an industry.
Vaughn?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Behzad is saying, because if I can kind of summarize what I think you're saying, Behzad, it's that if you are able to talk about and articulate the problems that you're facing, and you are reaching out to people who are not necessarily people you already know, who might have solutions, generally, at least you'll begin to move in the direction of a solution, even if you don't immediately get there, right? So talking about the problems with other people who might have more information about possible solutions or might be in control of the solution itself is always going to be the first thing. And I think, just to be very clear about it, one thing that every business should be doing, if they haven't already done it, is to be talking to their landlords to figure out whether they can arrange something to fix the other major fixed cost of running a business everywhere, which is rent, right? So you can do some things with labor costs. You must do something about rent if you can. If you can't, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you can, start the negotiations early. Like, they may go nowhere, but if you don't start, nothing will happen. And I think just sort of one level up or down, however you want to think about the levels of this, it's that I think this goes also to what Behzad was saying. If you are a business and you've developed a new product or service, a new line of business to kind of diversify, I think it's really easy as a creative entrepreneur to imagine a new product or service you could provide and think that it may or may not make money, right? And the big problem is if you come at it just from the perspective of being imaginative and you don't force yourself to really start to think about the concrete reality of what it would mean to like implement that new product or business in the context of all the other things that you're doing. So I guess what I'm advocating for is being very structured and disciplined about imagining realistically. And that's what the pandemic pivot spreadsheet is. All it is it's a free Google spreadsheet. And it forces you to list the things that you say you're going to do, how much it's going to take you in terms of manpower, initial investment, how many you're going to sell, how much it's going to make, just so that you know whether, based on what you currently know about the idea, with all the other things you're doing, does it make sense or not? Like, if you have a great idea that sounds great, but you put it down on paper and it turns out you would have to sell 500 times more than you think you could sell just to make it break even based on how much, don't do it, right? So it's about being imaginative, but being realistic as well, and forcing yourself to really be disciplined about putting down some of these assumptions. And if you don't do that, I think it's just much more likely that you will do something that isn't worth doing, and or skip doing something that actually is worth doing. And you don't want either of those things.
So just as an FYI, for those of you attending, I've put in the chat links to Vaughn's tools for the pandemic pivot, as well as the Moosh NYC link and the Industry One link as well. And also Vaughn just put in the chat a link to the Uncertainty Mindset. I've actually purchased the book. I can't wait to read it. And also, you will have access to experts like these if you sign up for openforgood.com, which is the professional portal for the James Beard Foundation, a place where we can ask experts on particular items what we need to do next, you know, and we can have forums around some of the topics that you care about. This particular webinar will be there as well, and these gentlemen, you will have access to them through that portal as well. And so I would like to thank both of you so much for your time, for your energy, for your very thoughtful process around, you know, something that is very difficult, but also presents an opportunity to do something different and better, to actually have an industry that is resilient as an industry, and something that, you know, can support all of us while we do what we love. So thank you again. Make sure you copy these links in the chat, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yay.
Cool.